Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Vivek Joshi of Entitled. I'm here to welcome my guest, Jason Wright from Gilbarco Vontier. Jason's a VP of Aftermarket Operations for the company. He took over this role about a year ago. I've known Jason for about a year and a half or 2 years now, but he's had an interesting career compared to most of the folks who wound up as aftermarket leaders. And given the eclectic background that he has, I thought it would be an interesting guest to have on this podcast to show that there's lots of different ways to get to the same position and kind of build and succeed from there. So with that, I'm excited to welcome Jason. Jason, I'm glad you're here today.
Hey Vivek, it's good to be with you, and it's a great subject to talk about, and looking forward to our conversation.
You know, Jason, what I always do is when I have guests on the podcast now, I always like to start with their story, right? That doesn't mean I need to go back all the way to South Africa, like for you, but yes, kind of South Africa. You've had a very interesting career path to get to this point. Yeah, maybe you can kind of give us the Jason story, in a bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I'm from South Africa originally, but we haven't lived in South Africa as a family for many, many years. We left about 25 years ago, and I started my career, went to school and so on in South Africa, and then started my career in the ERP world. And so started off as a quality assurance tester and worked in a few different financial services organizations around the world and based in the UK. It was a good experience, right? You'll hear me say this a lot in our session today, but my desire is always to understand how our machines work, right? How the business machine works, how the machine I'm in at the moment works. And I thought, getting in at the quality assurance level has been a theme in my career. So after I did that for a few years, moved over to the Middle East, where I joined Gilbarco Veeder Root as a program manager. So, understanding as a program manager how the machine works is a pretty cool role to get a really good insight across the whole business. Understanding how the manufacturing works, how the commercial side works, how it then all fits together to meet customer needs, and ultimately that's the priority, right? If we're producing great products and great services, but we don't solve some customer problems along the way, we're not going to be very successful. So after joining Gilbarco, I moved across to the US, and I've had a couple of different roles here, and I've been in engineering. I've led the reliability and quality organization for the global engineering team and R&D. I did 3 or 4 years leading the Vontier Business System, continuous improvement role here for the North America business. And then, as you say, finally, my most current role is leading the aftermarket service. I had this job for about a year, but been involved in our transformation in the aftermarket world for about 2 years now, since you and I met. So, it's been a year. It's been a great year. Very transformational. We're doing some new things and some really interesting things that we haven't done before. So it's pretty cool. Had a good run so far.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things you said out there which were interesting and different, pretty much candidly, from most people that arrive in this business, right? So you said you started in the ERP world. Almost nobody I know in the aftermarket started in the ERP world. I think you did SAP, if I remember correctly, a long time ago. And
That's
then
right.
you moved into the classic policy deployment, Danaher Business Systems, VBS, which is again very different. It's quality, but not quality. It's all about process discipline and really process improvement. How did those both play into your entry or promotion or being given this role or asked to take this role on, right? Because that to me is a fascinating background to get to where you did.
Yeah, again, my ERP background serves me well in understanding how the machine works, right? Because when you know how your ERP works and you know all the inputs and outputs, you understand how the business flows and how the orders come in, how you make something, whatever that widget is, whether it's a software package or a physical widget, you get that good understanding. And then when I joined Gilbarco, we were still with Danaher, and of course Danaher has a fantastic reputation for continuous improvement and Kaizen and so on. And when I joined the business, I was really intrigued by that whole business system concept, right? And I quickly caught on that it's very easy to pay lip service to these process improvement things and these business systems, and they're great advertising things to talk to Wall Street about we're good because we do this business system stuff. But when you really actually realize that that's how you work, it's not a tick box, but it's actually how you get the work done by using those tools, then it starts to come together, right? And so it's very normal for me to have a problem come up, and immediately we'll deploy one of the business system tools, not because it's a cool thing to do, but because that's actually how we're going to solve the problem. That's the tool that we use, right? So learning as much as I have about the business systems and Vontier business system now has really put me in a good place to be able to look pretty wide across the business, understand how everything works together, and then really make decisions around the trade-offs, right? We're going to make an improvement here, which might create a trade-off in another part of the business, but the net is a gain, right? So an improvement here might knock our commercial team a little bit, but it's a net improvement for the business. And I think those are the sort of things that I'm looking for every day. I'm looking for, my tagline when I was leading VBS was everybody every day. And if we just make 1% improvement every day, that's better than making a 30% improvement once a year. And,
Yep.
and that's the approach that I'm taking now in this new role, and this transformation is super iterative and lots of experimentation, lots of trust between the teams. Like, we're going to mess it up. It's okay. We'll learn. But, whatever we mess up is going to be a bite size, going to be quickly to fix, quickly to right the ship again. We haven't made too many big changes, right? So that background, especially around quality and especially around reliability, understanding the parts, understanding how they're consumed, how they're used, the failure rates, the failure modes, really has given me a very nice wide view for the aftermarket business.
It's interesting you use a word that has become really an important thing that I look for. You talked about the transformation of the aftermarket operation at Gilbarco. What is it that you guys were trying to change when you came in, right? Because there's fundamentally a bunch of changes you guys are trying to. What were some of those changes that were part of your agenda or part of your mandate, if you may?
Yeah. So before I took the role, we were in a year of discovery, and we took some time. We took about a year to go and have a look at where is our aftermarkets as a percentage of our equipment business, right? Just in terms of revenue and in terms of support and that sort of thing. And we looked at other industries. We looked within our industry. We looked at other outside of our industry, and we came to see that our aftermarket business was only existing as a result of our equipment business. Mm-hmm. There was no focus. There was no team driving things there. There was, it was just as a result of our equipment business. And so that's what we got as results, right? We got mm-hmm. a business that kind of got pulled along by our equipment business. It was a means to an end. Customers needed spare parts. And so we had to supply spare parts. And we saw an incredible opportunity to grow our contributions to the corporation and grow the business through this focus. We did 3 or 4 months of customer interviews and voice of customer sessions, and we heard loud and clear from our customers, right? They want to buy the parts from the OEM. They value the quality. They value the reputation and the brand. And if we could supply the parts, they would buy it from us. If we didn't have the parts, or we didn't have the parts in the right place at the right time, we have given them no choice but to go into the market and go to the third parties. But their choice will always be to buy from the OEM. And so when we heard this feedback, we definitely knew that we had to make an investment and we had to grow a team that's dedicated to this aftermarket space. And so that's what we did first, right? So we talked about the role for myself as leading this, and then I designed an organization from the bottom up, and I said, with the business that we are, what does that organization need to look like? And there was no focused commercial side of the business. Mm-hmm. So there was no sales, there was no marketing, there was no product management, which is a huge part of aftermarket.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had an operations execution team that was kind of swallowed up within the equipment business. So we split that out, created a dedicated organization, and split the business away. It is now a separate P&L.
Mm-hmm.
We measure it on its own, and if anybody's interested in listening to the Vontier earnings call, the aftermarket business now gets its own shout out in the
Mm.
Vontier earnings call. It is that strategic and that growthy and that important that even at a Vontier level, we're talking to our shareholders about this segment of our business. Obviously, it's highly profitable, it's growthy. We've got a fantastic install base that is
Mm-hmm.
continuing to grow, and we really want to leverage our brand and that install base to not only service our current install base, but to look at places to grow, right? Where do we have a
Mm-hmm.
right to play? We've got a fantastic channel, a fantastic product offering. We've got great reach. So we can be lazy and just sell spare parts like we've always done, or we can go and look for other opportunities to service the customer, right? To simplify their
Mm-hmm.
workflows, to provide them services around spare parts, to provide aftermarket parts, right? That are install after the fact and upgrade after the fact. So there's so much opportunity now that we're focusing on it. The intention is to continue to grow the business, but exponentially grow it beyond just the install base growth.
When you talk about what you just described, it's really almost like a fundamental transformation, right? You've gone from being, I'm going to use a phrase that I use often, where you've gone from being an afterthought or just happens to be there, versus saying, no, this is an intentional business. We're going to build around this thing. We're going to build a business system around it. You've got the P&L, you've got the people and the operations and the commercial side, and now you're going to market as an independent business. And to your point, it's important enough for Vontier to call it out on its own, right? So it's a big strategic imperative for the company.
That's right.
I'm going to go back a little bit again to the question I asked you, and I'm going to ask it differently this time, where you moved into this role because of and this training you've had was quite important. And the difficult question I'm going to ask you, or maybe awkward question, is, hey, why did the Gilbarco management or Vontier management choose Jason Wright to come into this role, right? Because it's always an important way. The decision making is actually interesting to see, right?
I always bring a very open approach to new opportunities, right? So every role that I've had with Gilbarco, and I've been blessed that they put the trust in me, but every role has been new to me, right? I didn't know how to do it when I started. But when we talk about the opportunity, because I have no preconceived ideas about the opportunity, I tend to go in with eyes wide open and looking for everything that we can possibly do with that. So when I took this role, it was exactly the same. We'd been talking about, prior to making the decision to split it off, we'd been talking about the opportunities, and I got it. Right? I just get it. I understand it when a lot of people don't see it or didn't see it in the organization. And so I was passionate that
Yep.
I see the opportunity, and not only do I understand the opportunity, but I've got a really good idea of how to get there. And I
Yeah.
understand really well how our machine works to be able to get there. And I know the customer, and I know the channel, and I know the consumer, right? So with all of that, putting all of those bits together, I think is the perfect recipe for success in the role. Now, I'm fortunate to have had all of those experiences, so that sets me apart. It's not because it's Jason; it's because of all of these add-ons that I've managed to have in my experience. Really culminates in a good spot for this
Yeah.
aftermarket business.
It's actually interesting. You said what you did, but also you kind of have a little bit of an unsaid thing there, which is the collection of experiences has made you a better businessman. But it's also a collection of experiences that's demonstrated that you can actually execute on new ideas in every job you've gone to, right? And since this was a new venture in some ways for Gilbarco Vontier, the collection of experiences you brought was actually very relevant and very tangible for this need. So I think that's actually the interesting part. And actually, that brings me to something that I experienced first 20 plus years ago in the large conglomerate that I worked for, is there are two aspects of your background that are very relevant and very similar to what was going on back then at GE. One is just like you have VBS, and we had Six Sigma, right, back in the old days. And then the second thing was there was a fundamental shift in the strategy to stop treating our services, is what we called it, instead of aftermarket services, an afterthought, to services a standalone P&L with the best leaders. So in some ways, the transformation you guys are going through is not that dissimilar to what I experienced or what we experienced at GE 25 years ago, where they were putting the best talent with the Six Sigma slash VBS kind of mindset and getting the discipline going. So it's actually interesting to see the pretty substantial commitment that the company is making to this business. When
Yeah,
you
I
when you
just want
think,
to add there,
sorry,
just to add there, the you called it out right? The VBS stuff, which I find so difficult to talk about because so many people talk about it very loosely and as a catchphrase. But I actually genuinely believe it, right? So having the experience together with that toolbox, without either one of those, I wouldn't have been so successful.
that's right.
But with that toolbox and the experience, we've managed to put it together, and our whole success over the last 18 months is built around the muscle we're building and the process we're building, so that as soon as possible we can get Jason out of that role,
Right.
right? And the machine still runs. That's the best thing I can do for the business. And the best steward I can be for the business is to take on these new opportunities, build the muscle and the rigor and the process around it so that it's not dependent on Jason. Because Jason
Yeah.
comes and Jason goes, right? But that muscle and that process is really what's going to set it apart. And the exciting thing is that all of the work that we've done here, very limited to the North American market, our global counterparts are starting to say, hey, well, can I use your playbook? So we've created a playbook on how we've done this. And so we've got a very good due diligence process on evaluating new opportunities or the business we want to be. And we've created a playbook. Now, we
Yeah.
use that playbook to guide our actions. But our global colleagues are saying, hey, can I borrow your playbook? And I said, for sure. That it's working for us. Let that be a start off for you, but don't use it verbatim because that worked for us, it might not work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually interesting that there's a element of what you just said that sometimes gets overlooked is this is an incredibly operationally intensive business done right. I mean, your customers are relying on you to make sure that the right part and the right service is there at the right time, or depending on what the business is about, there's some substantial cost of downtime, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the downtime can be pretty expensive for people. You can't afford that. So if you don't have a rigorous operational process and operational discipline, you can't get this thing to operate in a predictable, consistent manner. And if there's something that Six Sigma, VBS, and all these other policy systems teach you, is that consistency of output is really what's important more than improvement in output, right? So
Absolutely.
getting the consistency correct is the most important thing, and I think that's the thing that I think you bring to the party as well.
I think one of the most important things that I tell my team is I want to be predictable. And I don't mind if it's predictably good or predictably bad,
That's right.
but I want to be
That's right.
predictable, right? Because once I'm predictable and once I understand how the machine works, I can make it better.
That's
But
right.
if it's scattered and you don't know why you're good or why you're bad, you can never make the improvements that you need to get better. So
That's right.
so linearity and predictability is everything that I need.
In the old days, we used to say, reduce the variability and then increase the mean, right? Or decrease the mean,
That's
depending
it.
on what you're trying to do. So I think that's really
Yeah.
what you're trying to do. When you think about this ground up business, greenfield business in a way that you're building, what are the priorities that you and the management team at Gilbarco and Vontier, what have you guys set for this business in terms of the top two or three priorities, and how those manifesting themselves now, about a year into your job?
So the number one priority was become easier to do business with, right? That was it. So in our VOC, voice of customer sessions, our customers told us we're tremendously difficult to do business with, and our systems, processes, tools, communication, all of those things needed to be improved. So my focus is on the aftermarket. It's true about the equipment business, but less so because the aftermarket business is so fast and so transactional that it's so much more important, right? So the first priority was to make ourselves easier to do business with, and by listening to the customer's feedback, that's the first thing we tackled, right? Improve our on-time delivery, improve our quality, and improve our communication, right? So if we're delivering better on time, they can plan their lives around that. If we have great quality, then it's a first time fix improvement, which improves uptime. And then on our communications, we've all just lived through COVID, right? We all know what challenges were in COVID around supply chain and predictability of being able to deliver. But communication was super important. So if you're not going to hit your time, just tell us when so that we
Yep.
can plan, right?
Yep.
And so that was number one priority, is just make it easier to do business with. The second priority for us has become, where else can we play? So we've got a fantastic brand, a great infrastructure, a great channel, a really well-established and mature supply chain. So now where else can we play? Where else do we have the rights to play? So, when we think about the product, and for those listening, we sell gas pumps, right? So most people who are going to be listening to this have used the product we create and make, right? You fill your car with gas. And so when we think about that, it's very easy for us to say, well, that's the space we play in. But in fact, we play in the whole gas station, the whole convenience store, up above ground, underground, the convenience store, the car wash, the HVAC, the refrigeration. We have access to that whole site. So where else do I have a right to play? And where else can I support the customer and simplify their workflows, right? So at the moment, if you think about an operator of a C-store, they're phoning Gilbarco for their pumps, they're phoning the car wash people for the car wash, they're phoning the fridge people for the fridge, they're phoning the HVAC for the phone, and it's complex. And their core business is selling product from their convenience store site.
Right.
Their core business is not how to keep it all running. And so really the next opportunity for me is to go and help them simplify their workflows. And where else can I help, right? Which other problems can I solve for? I'm going to solve the spare parts for the gas pumps. But where else can I solve the same theme, just with my reach, right? So can I help somewhere else? And really that's the opportunity that we're working through at the moment, is just working with our customers and our channel to understand what is their strategic growth initiative, and where can I help them, right? Where can I play that adds value? First of all, no one's going to pay us for not adding value. So where am I adding value? And where can I simplify their work? And that's really where I'm looking at next. And then finally, the third priority, if you like, if you want to kind of capture three, is how do we become really super efficient in what we do, right? So the building block is understanding how the machine works. The second part is, where else can we make this machine work well? And then the third will be, okay, now let's fine tune that machine to be super slick, right? And that involves technology. It involves process changes. It involves, the Internet of Things, connectivity. There's a bunch of different levers to pull there to make the operation super slick.
What's interesting you said along the way is you talked about customer experience and the equipment people sell it once and then they're gone away for the next decade or something, right? Versus aftermarket and service being there way more present, way more often than not. And one of our other guests said to me, is like, Vivek, we have way more frequent touches with the customer and therefore have a chance to either do better or screw up on behalf of ourselves and the customer, right? The old... long time ago, we all read about the moment of truth in Scandinavian Airlines, the big case study back then. And I think people forget that the services business is really I call it the tip of the spear of the customer experience paradigm, right? If you do it right, that memory stays with the customer for a long time. But if you do it badly, you got repeated touches to do it badly, and it just leaves some pretty, bad taste in your customer's mouth. And I think that's the important part. The second thing that you said was actually interesting to me, is you're now looking not just as a fueling solutions provider in the context of a gas station, but the gas station is a part of the mobility solution that exists as an infrastructure across most countries. And so what do you do with that is expanding the pie for Gilbarco Vontier across multiple things. So I think that's a fascinating part of your strategy as well, which people kind of will overlook if you don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, and that whole mobility ecosystem is transforming, right? I mean, we've got EV and electrification coming in. So where do I play in that? How do I play in
Yep.
that? And then,
Yep.
we're going to have convenience locations will always be popular places for people to charge, right? Because
Yep.
you've got your charger, you've got a convenience store, you've got good food, you've got restaurant capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll always be a destination. But that equipment will also be installed in other locations, right? Outside
Yep.
supermarkets or, at apartment blocks, et cetera, et cetera. So do I lose my right to play as a service provider just because the geography of the install base is changing, or do I keep servicing it even though it's not convenience anymore? So it's super interesting to understand where we play. I don't know the answer yet,
Yeah.
but I think if we hadn't made this structural change, no one would be thinking about this.
Right.
And just by
Right.
the nature of us focusing in on this part of the business, someone's thinking about it. Some stuff's going to stick, some stuff's not, but at least we're thinking about it. It won't be by mistake we miss opportunity. It'll be a decision.
There's something that came to mind when you said some of the things you did. Is one is the geographic footprint is going to change by definition when electrification and EV charging happens, not just at the gas station that's regulated because of all the permits and all the other things they need to do, but the stuff outside apartment blocks, in the parking lot outside this building where I'm at. So now that completely changes the footprint of quote unquote the refueling station as maybe, right? How do
Right.
you play this? So that's point number one. The strategic choices one has to make are going to be pretty consequential, if you may. And again, the services world and aftermarket world, you're more present than the equipment providers are, right? You're going to go continuously do things with that charging station or the fueling station or whatever it might be. The second thing that I heard you say is that as these transitions happen, collecting the data from the field, collecting this information from the field is going to be an important part of the feedback mechanism to your management processes, right? And I think I've always said this to people is like when I was in a large technology company, we had 10,000 people in the field doing field service. I said, look, my people, when I was in services, my people are in the field way more often in that customer's data center, in the customer's IT shop than the salespeople ever were. And we see everything out there, right? And bringing that information back is so valuable. That's an understated, underappreciated aspect of the services business as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Jason.
A big thing for us is to close that loop, right?
Yep.
And the super clear understanding that we have that the folks who are selling equipment are not selling to the same person that I'm selling spare parts to. And that's
Correct.
super important, right? I'm selling spare parts to the technician. He's selling it to the parts manager. The parts manager is
Right.
selling it to the executive team.
Yep.
If I can get the technician to always reach for a Gilbarco part, I'm winning, right?
Yep.
Because they are going to say, please don't buy these other parts. Please buy
That's right.
Gilbarco parts because they are the best, highest
Yep.
quality, easy to install. They integrate natively, et cetera, et cetera. When they're selling to the equipment side of the business, right, they're talking to the procurement team. They're talking to this
That's
and
right.
that. It's really, that has become an eye opener. Then,
Yeah.
going forward, getting our parts in that warehouse and getting shelf space in that warehouse is huge, right? It becomes much more like a retailer kind of relationship, right? I
Yep.
want the shelf space. If I've got the shelf space, the other guy can't have it. So I want
That's
that
right.
shelf space, right? So it's super interesting how it's changing the dynamic of how we approach and how we think about things.
When I listen to these experiences and the kind of strategy and the priorities you're talking about, I have to believe that in some ways you're way past experience in technology has to be an important aspect of your toolkit going forward, right? So when I think about your tech background, you're one of the few guys who came out of the tech industry into the industrial side. I mean, it's a very different shift for most people. I have to
Yeah.
believe that that's going to play a role in your future as well. Have you thought about that much, or is that
Absolutely.
just getting caught up?
No, that is a huge driver for us, and in a lot of ways, how I identify the opportunities is all based in that experience that I've had. So one of the big things that any aftermarket or spare parts business can do is seek the consumption rates on your spare parts, right?
Hmm.
How are they being consumed? How often? Where? Which conditions? So my ERP background and understanding material replenishment is a big part of how I'm driving the team forward, right? And how we're
Yeah.
working with our channel partners. So if I could get into their ERP systems and see real-time consumption of parts, it's huge for me because I can start preparing the next delivery before they even drop
Yep.
the PO, right?
Yep.
The pallet can be waiting for them because I know they've consumed it. I know their min maxes. I know when the PO is coming, so I can get that whole order ready for them so that their replenishment cycle is flattened out as well, right? So we can all take care of our working capital effectively. We can all make sure that our customers' uptime is good because we've got all the right parts in the right places. So when that happens at an individual level, it's good. When
Yep.
the OEM gets to see that across a geography, that's huge, right? Because now I can start to look at, okay, hurricanes coming.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get ready, right? We shouldn't be surprised that every season the hurricanes come. It's not a surprise. So let's get ready for them, right? Let's look at
Mm-hmm.
last year's hurricane season. Let's look at the path it took. All the data is available, right? FEMA publishes all the zip codes, and let's get ready. So go out to our channel and say, hey, in these areas, you're more than likely going to need this many spare parts to service
Mm-hmm.
a typical hurricane season. So let's get ahead
Mm-hmm.
of it. I can see what they've consumed. I can see what they've bought. I can tell them how much to stock. So getting into that vendor managed replenishment
Mm-hmm.
or just better integrated on part consumption is a huge step forward for us. And it's absolutely born from my experience. And I wouldn't have thought about material replenishment if I was a commercial guy that's got a sales background. Right? It didn't
That's
matter.
right. That's
I would
right.
just I would just constantly be complaining that there aren't enough parts. Now,
Yes.
now I can understand how the machine works and make sure the parts
Right.
are ready ahead of time,
Right.
right? So we've got seasonal events that you can prepare for and be proactive for. Right? Winter comes every year, believe it or not. Every year, winter comes. Why are we not getting ready for winter in June?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we getting
Mm-hmm.
ready for winter in November or after the fact? So let's get our supply chain seasonality well understood so we can understand how things are consumed and we can get them there before the customer needs them. That's great service.
Yeah.
If we can get that right, we're winning. That's it.
It's interesting when I listen to some of the examples you're giving. It's what I would call data-driven selling, insight-driven selling, insight-driven management, if you may. And these are things that, because of the background you had, you take it for granted. I mean, there's things that people don't think this way. But I think meeting the combination of a technology background in the old days to your VBS background in terms of policy and system and rigor of discipline to now the commercial aspect of thinking from the end user, thinking from the market, trying to understand. It's a fascinating mix of experiences that you bring to the role here. When you think of the broader scheme of things within the Vontier business, and the interesting observation that I think I've made when I've spoken to people, you and some of the other guests we've had, is each of you bring different experiences of the party. I mean, you brought these technology and VBS experiences. Somebody else has spoke to brought in sales and engineering experiences. Somebody else got operations experiences. I think the question I have for you is a bit unfair, right? But it is. I'm going to ask this question anyway. Is that all these years, aftermarket was considered a bit of a sleepy backwater, right? You grew up in the business, wrench turning as we call it, but now it's being populated, if you may, by leaders such as you who bring diverse experiences. A, do you see enough of this happening, Jason? And if the answer is no, what do you think needs to happen? If the answer is yes, what's driving it, right? So it's a complicated question. That's a bit unfair, but I thought I'll ask you the question anyway, because this is a big shift that's going on in the whole aftermarket and services business of most companies.
Yeah. So you know how it is when you buy a new car. Before you bought the car, you never saw any on the road, but as soon as you buy one, you see them every day, right? So before I had this role, I didn't think about aftermarket, right?
Yeah.
Now that I'm in the role, that's what I think about, and I'm looking across industries, and I'm looking across, the big players. I'm super interested in the Caterpillars of the world, right? Because
Hmm.
because they've got a global business, much like ours.
Hmm.
They've got massively complex machinery that they need to support with with spare parts, but they've got a massive competitor in all of the
Hmm.
third parties that go and
Hmm.
supply, you know, for want of a better expression, these gray parts into the industry.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it more. So your first part of the question was, is this happening enough? I don't think it's happening enough. I don't think that large corporations are thinking about the opportunity around aftermarket. It is continuing to be the pull through business from the equipment business. And I think, people are lazily thinking about it because
Mm-hmm.
it's a good margin business. They say, wow, that's a great margin business. But they're not really saying, well, shoot, a 10% top line growth is a huge margin pull through,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to sell a lot of equipment to get the same margin as you would from the
Right.
spare parts, right?
Right.
As a percentage. So I don't think it's happening enough. I think when companies want to take this step, I would say if it's purely commercial, if you could put someone in that's purely commercial, there's such a massive amount missing
Mm-hmm.
from being able to be a great salesperson or lead a great sales team if you don't understand how the machine works.
Machine
Now,
works.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying, I've been super fortunate to be having many cross-functional roles to really understand how the machine works. But I would say the person selling it is selling it to a person who uses it. If the person
Mm-hmm.
selling it has never used it, it's a hard conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
really a difficult conversation. So I'd say at least for the folks who are looking to do this, at least find a leader who has practical experience of the product they're talking about, not just
Mm-hmm.
theoretical, not just understanding
Right.
the math and how the discounting works and the value proposition, but actually has held it in their hands and understands the application of it.
Yeah. You know, as we wrap up this thing and we're coming to the 36-minute mark right now, I have always a question that I like to ask. As I may have said this to you before, I'm really deeply inspired and I appreciative of Guy Raz and his famous podcast series that he has. And the famous question he asked at the end of end of his interview is always something that I'm fascinated by, which is, if you were to look back at a career, Jason, right? How much of it would you ascribe to luck versus how much would you ascribe to Jason's really amazing? That's why he got to where he did.
Look, I tell my kids, it's easy to get a job, it's hard to keep a job. And I think that's the way I look at all of these sort of things, right? It's everyone's taking a risk, giving an opportunity, but it's
Yep.
really, a year or two down the road, if you've made a success of it, that's skill
Yep.
and experience, right? So I'm going to take all the luck I can get the opportunities, but I'm going to deploy all of the things I know to be able to keep those opportunities and make a success of it, right? It's the same thing I
Yep.
say to the equipment sales team. You can go and sell 10 of anything, even good or bad. Sell 10 of
Yep.
anything, but try sell the next 10.
Yeah.
That's when the rubber meets the road, right? That
That's
means
right.
you've got a good service network, you've got good spare parts, you've got a good value prop, the good quality. So don't tell me you sold first 10 of anything. Tell me you sold the next 10. And
That's
that
right.
goes for my career. It goes for, how I approach customer problems. It's like I can get lucky and solve a problem, but am I part of their workflow? Geez, if I'm part of their workflow, I'm really doing a good job.
Yep. Trust to do with that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually very consistent with what most of our guests have said. And most of us got to this point in our careers by grabbing the opportunities that luck presented and then making something out of them, right? So,
Yeah, I can
excellent.
tell you one last thing. The role that I have now was actually offered to somebody else, and I took my leader to the side and I said, "Hey, this is my job, right? No
Yeah,
one knows more about this than I do." And as it worked out, things changed, and they gave me the opportunity, and I run with it.
here we go. Here we go. 15, 18 months later, you're running even a bigger piece of it now.
Yeah,
This has been really a good conversation, Jason. Thank you so much. Like I said, you've brought a completely different perspective to the aftermarket business, not just of Vontier, but as I look at some of the people we've known in this industry. So, first of all, congratulations on achieving this success. Good luck for the next 18 to 24 months in terms of how you guys are continuing the transformation. And I'm deeply appreciative of you taking the time to share with us the experiences and your mindset in terms of how to build an aftermarket business. So, thank you again.
super.
Appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Awesome.